Yeah, well, thanks for coming along. We've got some statistics that we think are rather newsworthy. Notice Amanda Banks isn't here from the West. They didn't find it quite as newsworthy last evening, but nevertheless, it's a bit of history to this matter. So one of the reasons why this government intended to bring in the mandatory sentencing legislation is that we'd identified over a 5-year period prior to taking office that we had assaults against public officers increased by 10%, and in fact 80% of those assaults were against police. There'd been a very steady increase in assaults on public officers, which had started in or about March of 2007 and continued right up until the very point that this legislation came to be debated in about March of 2009. And when we've tracked the data back, as soon as this legislation came to be debated, it was the first time in a long time that we saw assaults on police officers start to dip down excuse me, in the other direction. So what we then did on the year anniversary of the legislation for mandatory sentencing is we tracked 1 year after the proclamation and 1 year before. And what we found with respect to police officers, that in the 12 months before the legislation came into effect, there were 1,346 assaults on police officers. In the 12 months after, there was 969 assaults on police officers. That is, of course, 377 less assaults on police officers in the year after the legislation came into force, which represents a quite remarkable decrease of 28% in assaults on police officers in 1 year. And for anyone who follows crime statistics across any category of crime, that is an absolutely extraordinary decrease in a very short period of time. It's also had an effect with respect to other categories of public officers. For this we calculated financial years, and in the last 09-10 financial year we found that assaults on other categories of public officers were down 7.5% compared to the 08-09 financial year, and in fact 20%, so down 20% compared to 2 financial years ago in 07 and 08, which is also, when you understand something about criminal statistics, another remarkable statistic. What we've seen is 37 individuals considered under the mandatory sentencing legislation. 14 have been charged, 6 have been sentenced, 5 are in remand awaiting trial, and 2 matters were discontinued. And when you look at the 6 individuals who have been charged and convicted under the mandatory sentencing legislation, they are precisely the types of offences the government said would get captured by this legislation. They are the bitings, the breakings of the skin, the serious bruisings, the broken noses, matters which prior to this legislation were not being dealt with by terms of imprisonment, after this legislation are being dealt with by terms of imprisonment, and it appears that people are finally getting the message. People who behave in a thuggish and loutish way towards police officers, who put themselves at considerable risk to protect the public, they are finally getting the message because of this very firm response from the government. So it's a very pleasing day for us. I think that Rob also has some statistics for you, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you. Can I just say, 2 years ago tomorrow, the Liberal National Government were elected very much on a law and order platform, and we have come good with our promises. As the Attorney General has said, we have seen huge benefits come from the mandatory sentencing laws that we introduced in relation to assaults on police officers. In the first 8 months of this year alone, we've seen almost a 33% decrease in the number of serious assaults against police officers. I travel around the state quite a bit and I talk to many of our police officers and their families, but it's not only those that support the laws that we brought into place, it's also the community, and our whole agenda is to try and make our community safer. I believe we're doing this, and I believe we're protecting our police officers. We're not prepared to see our police officers being used as punch bags by the thugs in society who seem to get some enjoyment out of attacking our police officers. Very clear message now to those thugs. You attack our police officers and you will definitely go to jail.
3 police officers were injured in regional WA in the past week. Are you disappointed these attacks are still continuing?
Yes, I'm very disappointed when any of our police officers are attacked. It's unfortunately part of the territory when you're a police officer, but the good news is that we've seen a huge decrease in the number of our officers who have been attacked, and we will continue the hard fight against these thugs who continue to assault our police officers.
Any plans to widen the scope now, Minister? Teachers, nurses, going to bring them into the mix now?
Well, that'd be a question for the Attorney General rather than me. I'm predominantly concerned about police officers, obviously.
What response have you got from the police about these figures?
The police are delighted. I've had a conversation with Russell Armstrong, the police union president, and he's absolutely over the moon that we've seen this sort of reduction. Of course, the police were very supportive, and their families, and the community. We had a huge rally here outside Parliament House a year or so ago when the community was calling for us to, as a government, to bring in these laws. We've heard a lot of carping and bitching from the opposition. They said it would never work and there'd be disastrous results. Well, I'm sorry, they got it wrong. The community got it right, we got it right.
Yesterday, senior police sent a media release out saying they were concerned about
I can assure you the police are always concerned when any one of their officers gets assaulted, but they are very happy to see the sort of reductions that we've seen in the first year of the mandatory sentencing laws, but also in the first 8 months of this year, where we've seen, as I say, almost a 33% decrease in the number of assaults against our police officers.
How does it break down between metro and regional?
I think the majority are still in the metropolitan area, but there are some in the regional area. I mean, these laws cover the whole of WA, and it doesn't matter where our police officers are. Anybody who assaults our police officers and inflicts a sort of bodily harm or grievous bodily harm, they will go to jail.
I'll just ask you about the smoking. The smoking was coming to effect today. Policing and enforcing smoking in cars. Who's that up to? Who's answer that for?
Oh, look, I think you'll find it comes under the Minister for Health, the smoking in cars regime. If a police officer pulls somebody up for a traffic offence and they find that they are smoking in a vehicle where a child is present, under 16 years of age is present, then the police will have the power to infringe that particular person.
But they're not going to be tasked with charging, predominantly looking for people smoking in cars.
There won't be a smoke patrol, I'm pretty sure of that. They've got more priorities to do, but they will uphold the law, and if they find somebody, as I say, that's smoking in a car with a child present, then they will deal with them.
Can I just ask you both your positions on the euthanasia bill? If it was to make it to the lower house?
Oh, look, I haven't even seen the legislation that's being debated in the upper house. Until I do, I'm not prepared to make a comment.
Mr. Paul?
Look, I've had a look over the legislation. I don't think it's of high enough quality to warrant passing through Parliament, and certainly it's not of high enough quality to do what Mr. Chappell thinks it will do. It really is not anywhere near the quality that you'd want on an issue of this seriousness.
What would it need to change? What would need to change to get it
Just about everything.
Well, what's the most glaring issue or problem?
Well, look, I think that you look towards some jurisdictions that have had similar legislation, and you have to have very tight legislation to make sure that when you set up procedures and checks to ensure that you don't have an outcome which is unanticipated, that those procedures and checks are followed. And I don't think that the procedures and checks in this legislation are anywhere near tight enough.
Would you work with him to
No. No, look, I mean, people want to constantly have comments from members of Parliament about euthanasia in the abstract, and it's an immensely complicated issue which you can't really deal with in the abstract. You have to look at it in terms of single pieces of legislation, and this legislation's not up to the job.
Dr. Hames on ABC Radio this morning was talking about his work as a GP and how he had previously administered palliative care, which may have hastened the death of somebody who was very, very seriously ill. Are there any legal issues with that, or is that okay?
Look, I don't know the circumstances that you're talking about, and again, that's the sort of first-year law student question. What would happen in such a circumstance? I'd need to have specifics.
Just in relation to the assaults,
Yep.
are you looking at widening the scope down, as I asked earlier? Teachers, capability case, I guess that springs to mind. Nurses, any plans?
Look, we're not closed-minded to that possibility, and in fact, I would say that this has been such a remarkable success to date that we will keep our mind open to that possibility, but there are no immediate plans.
Just one more on euthanasia. Are you sort of saying that it would be like a kind of a legal hazard in a way for the government to push for legislation like this?
But we don't have any plans for legislation like this. The legal hazard would be for the Parliament.
So you're saying the proposal, as it stands, is reworking altogether?
Well, what I'm saying is that irrespective of what your theoretical views on euthanasia may or may not be, this legislation is not of a high enough quality to warrant passing through Parliament on such an important issue.
So the bill aside then, what about your personal views on it?
Look, they're views which I waver on, and I must say that I don't have a concluded view on it. I've got sympathy and understanding for both the sort of conservative side of it and the side that wants to try and help people who are in terrible circumstances in palliative care, but I actually don't have a completely view.
Just on the assaults, when you say assaults on police,
Well, what it means is that prior to this legislation coming into place, our government took a view that the single biggest problem facing criminal justice in the state was the fact that individuals who came in contact with police had lost respect for the authority of the uniform. I put a view before this legislation that we as a society were showing greater protection and respect to AFL umpires than we were to police, and we took a view that you had to arrest that decline in people's attitudes towards police very quickly, and we did that with a legislative response, and it worked.
sorry, and assaulted, so does that mean that reported assault?
Yep, total assaults on police are down, all reported assaults.
Can I just ask as well, there are continued calls today for the G4S contract to be cancelled for the state government to take responsibility across their transport. Is that happening?
I've made about 5 or 6 announcements on this. The announcements go along these lines, that there is a contract in place. I've received legal advice that if there was any time in which the contract could have been terminated by the government, it was during the period of the Labor government when the tragic events with respect to Mr Ward occurred. The previous government didn't take that opportunity. What that means is we have to consider this contract once the contract comes to a conclusion, which is next year. What we have said is that we are looking to the possibility of further tenders, but in a more restricted way, so that more of the transport of prisoners will come into the public sphere, but some part of it will likely still remain in the private sphere.